Ethan's voice, cool and measured, cut through the morning quiet of the office. He commented on the small cut marring Jackson's lower lip. He was dressed in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, his lean fingers idly flipping through a financial report as if he were discussing market trends. His gaze, however, was sharp and direct. He was the epitome of calm, austere control. It was hard to believe this was the same man who, just last night, had held Jackson's face in his hands, his eyes clouded with drink and something else, something urgent and desperate. The phantom taste of a potent craft cocktail still lingered on Jackson's tongue. A frantic, high-pitched alarm went off inside Jackson's head, a digital scream from the system. It was losing its simulated mind over the fact that the male lead had initiated a kiss. It demanded Jackson push him away immediately. Jackson relayed back that he had tried, but Ethan had been surprisingly strong. The system accused him of being a master of manipulation, claiming his attempt had all the force of a gentle suggestion, more an invitation than a rejection. A silent, smug admission was Jackson's only reply. He remembered the feeling of that kiss, clumsy but fiercely passionate. It was, he had to admit, electrifying. A sudden, sharp jolt of pain, like a static shock, coursed through him, the system's punishment for straying. He mentally begged for mercy, promising to get back on track. Before this, back in his real life, friends had always told Jackson to tone it down, that his flippant approach to romance would come back to bite him. He'd never listened. The world was full of interesting people. Why settle for just one? His friend's prediction came true in the worst way. He'd gotten involved with a volatile mob scion and was caught texting someone else. The young gangster's fury was swift. Jackson woke up bound and gagged, only for their getaway to be intercepted by rival thugs. A stray bullet had found its way into his chest, and everything went black. He woke up here, a character in a generic corporate romance novel. The plot revolved around the brooding CEO, Ethan Cole, an orphan who pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and the sweet, resilient heroine, Claire Shaw, the only one capable of melting his frozen heart. Jackson had scoffed. What about him, the loyal best friend who had been with Ethan through thick and thin, from their first lemonade stand to their first multi-million-dollar deal? The system had cheerfully informed him that he was also slated to play the role of the devoted, but ultimately heartbroken second male lead.
A fantastique surprise.
A glorified plot device. But to stay alive, he had agreed. The problem was, he'd been too good at being a brother-in-arms, and now Ethan's affection meter was dangerously off the charts. Ethan was everything Jackson found attractive in a man, a walking temptation he was forbidden from touching. His past life of careless affairs had earned him a karmic sentence, playing straight for the rest of this one. He glanced back at Ethan, who now seemed to have no memory of the previous night's events, likely chalking it up to a drunken blackout. Jackson ran his tongue over the split in his lip. It stung. A small part of him felt a hollow pang of disappointment, but he knew it was for the best. If the male lead in this story bent any further, the system would probably just delete him. A low voice commanded him not to lick it. Ethan had moved from behind his imposing oak desk, holding a small tube of antiseptic cream. Before Jackson could react, two strong fingers cupped his chin, forcing his lips to part slightly. Ethan's thumb, calloused from years of nervous habit, gently applied the cool balm. The pad of his thumb brushed against Jackson's teeth, and as he pulled his hand away, a slight, glistening thread of saliva briefly connected them. The morning sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows caught the moisture on his skin, making it gleam. Ethan turned away and meticulously wiped his hand with a tissue, his handsome face a mask of detached concern. Jackson, the veteran flirt, felt an uncharacteristic blush warm his cheeks. He silently asked the system if it was sure Ethan wasn't actively trying to seduce him. The system's reply was curt. A depraved mind sees depravity in everything. Jackson remembered it saying the same thing a month ago. That time, Ethan had claimed a pipe burst in his penthouse apartment. Jackson had suggested calling the building's maintenance, but Ethan insisted on handling it himself. The result was a thoroughly soaked Ethan, his thin silk shirt clinging to his torso, revealing the sharp definition of his chest and abdomen. Water dripped from his chiseled jaw, tracing a path down his neck. He was a vision of icy control melting into raw desire, and it left Jackson's mouth dry. He had wagered the system a bag of jalapeno kettle chips that Ethan was putting on a show for his benefit. The system, smugly confident in the heterosexual narrative, had scoffed and pulled up the affection meter to prove Jackson wrong. Its digital shriek was one of pure horror. Ethan's affection for Jackson was at 99%. Jackson had calmly listed the reasons. He defended him from bullies in school, taken business risks for him, nursed him through hangovers, and they lived together. He'd warned the system that this level of bromance was bound to get complicated. The system was in despair, as all these actions had been its own mandated tasks for Jackson. Now, after applying the cream, Ethan sat beside him on the leather sofa, legs crossed, his profile illuminated by the city lights. Jackson decided to cut to the chase. He placed a key on the coffee table between them. He announced that he was moving out and that this was the key to Ethan's place. The air in the room grew instantly colder. Ethan toyed with a simple silver band on his thumb, his head tilted. He asked why, his voice smooth but with an edge of ice. He said if Jackson didn't like the penthouse, he would buy him a new one. Jackson took off his wire-rimmed glasses and explained that it wasn't about the apartment. They were 25, not 5-year-old kids in a group home anymore. It was time they built their own separate lives, maybe even settled down. Ethan's eyes, shadowed by his long lashes, fell to the key. He asked quietly if Jackson had found someone he liked. Thinking of Claire, the designated female lead who was scheduled to make her appearance at Ethan's upcoming birthday gala, Jackson confirmed that he had. A flicker of something cold and sharp passed through Ethan's dark eyes. He asked who it was, if he could meet her. Jackson told him he would, eventually. Ethan gave a tight, humorless smile, removed the silver ring from his thumb, and agreed it was for the best. The move was delayed. Ethan insisted on helping, but claimed a major project at work would keep him busy for a few weeks. He spoke of their shared history, of how Jackson might feel disoriented in a new place alone. He mentioned the sleek Italian espresso machine Jackson was so fond of, asking if he could really bear to part with it so suddenly. His words were thoughtful and considerate, making it impossible for Jackson to refuse. The day Ethan finally set for the move was overcast and heavy. A storm was brewing over Chicago. Ethan was in the bedroom, meticulously folding Jackson's clothes with a focus that was almost domestic. Jackson leaned against the doorframe, watching the way the soft fabric of Ethan's shirt stretched across his broad back, then decided to help. He went to grab his phone from the nightstand and something glinted in the gap between the table and the bed. It was a silver chain necklace, a double-layered design with a simple, thorn-like ring woven through it. It wasn't expensive, but it was a gift from Ethan after they'd closed their first big deal. Jackson had thought he'd lost it. Ethan had once said the necklace suited him, an observation the system had amended to "it suits your whole predator in gentleman's clothing" vibe. The ring, however, Ethan had later taken back for himself, claiming it felt more like a shackle, a reminder to stay rational and restrained. Jackson had teased him about it, and later, that night, he'd had a vivid dream of Ethan, bare-chested and bound in red ropes, a sight that was both sacred and profane. The memory still made him stir. The move took all day, and by evening, the predicted storm broke with a vengeance. Rain hammered against the windows of Jackson's new apartment. As Ethan prepared to leave, Jackson stopped him, insisting it was too dangerous to drive in the downpour and offering him the guest room. Ethan looked out at the blurred city lights and nodded, accepting without a word. The system issued a stern. Sleeping was fine, sleeping with him was not. Jackson shot back that it was always Ethan who came to his bed on nights like this. A trauma from their childhood in the foster system, a night when older kids had locked a small Ethan in a freezing warehouse during a thunderstorm, had left him with a deep-seated fear. Jackson had found him, wrapped him in his own coat, and held him until morning. Since then, rainy nights were hard for him. The bedroom door creaked open. The mattress dipped as Ethan slid in behind him, an arm snaking around Jackson's waist, pulling him close. His breath was hot on Jackson's neck as he pleaded in a low whisper, asking that this be the last time, that Jackson not push him away. Jackson sighed and gave in. Claire appeared at Ethan's birthday gala, just as the script dictated. She was a server, her simple uniform a stark contrast to the designer attire of the guests. She was beautiful with a quiet strength about her. Jackson, playing his part, had arranged the high-paying gig for her after finding her handing out flyers in the sweltering summer heat. Ethan was talking to a business associate, but his attention seemed to drift. He eventually made his way over to Claire, his tall frame completely obscuring her from Jackson's view. The system was ecstatic, believing the story was finally correcting itself. Jackson walked over, a velvet box in his hand. As he got closer, he realized Ethan and Claire weren't flirting. They were standing in an awkward, formal silence. Claire noticed Jackson and her face flushed. She thanked him profusely for the job, admitting she had initially thought he was a scammer. Jackson smiled and replied that he admired her caution. After she hurried off to the kitchen, he turned to Ethan, who was gripping a champagne flute so tightly his knuckles were white. The system informed Jackson that Ethan's affection score for him had dropped to 90. Jackson ignored the sour twist in his gut and handed Ethan the box. It was his birthday gift. Ethan opened it, revealing a pair of custom cufflinks shaped like miniature constellations. He didn't look at them. He looked at Jackson and asked if the girl, Claire, was the one he liked. Jackson felt a desperate urge to tell him the truth, but the script was absolute. He nodded. Ethan clipped the cufflinks onto his sleeves, his smile razor-sharp. He said, through gritted teeth, that he absolutely adored the gift. The system announced it was going offline for a month to repair a bug that had created an anomalous, unlabeled black bar on Ethan's stats that was fluctuating wildly. Before it vanished, it warned Jackson to behave. Jackson followed the script. He hired Claire as his secretary. Ethan intervened, stating that he wanted to interview her personally to ensure she was qualified. After a rigorous interview, Ethan, impressed by her credentials, promptly made her his secretary instead. Jackson would see them through Ethan's office window, looking close, engaged in conversation. One afternoon, Ethan saw Jackson watching and immediately lowered the blinds. The casual Jax he'd always used was gone, replaced with a formal Jackson. He was clearly staking his claim on the female lead. Fueled by a strange mix of scripted duty and genuine pique, Jackson began a campaign of grand, public gestures toward Claire. He bought a pot of baby's breath, Ethan's favorite flower, a secret symbol between them since they were kids, and walked out of his office, intending to give it to her. He ran into Claire in the hallway. Just as he offered her the plant, the door to Ethan's office swung open. Ethan stood there, his face a mask of cold fury. He didn't say a word. He grabbed Jackson's arm, his grip like steel, and dragged him out of the building. The ride to Jackson's apartment was silent and terrifyingly fast. Ethan knew the key code. The heavy door slammed shut, and Jackson found himself pinned against the entryway wall. Ethan's laugh was harsh. He asked if Jackson had ever wondered how he knew the code. It was because Jackson was a liar, always dangling a thread of hope just to snatch it away. He confessed he knew he was drunk when he kissed him, but Jackson hadn't pushed him away. He had kissed back, and for a moment, Ethan had felt an overwhelming joy. And then, the very next day, Jackson had told him he was moving out, that he'd found someone else. What kind of cruel joke was that he demanded to have found someone new but set his apartment code to Ethan's birthday? He said he was a fool for letting himself be played with for so long, but he couldn't stop himself. He loved him to the point of madness. His words were a gut punch. Jackson realized he had misunderstood everything. Before he could form a response, Ethan's mouth was on his, fierce and punishing. His own tie was yanked loose and used to bind Jackson's wrists. His mind went blank. He asked what Ethan was doing. Ethan's eyes, still wet from the heat of their kiss, held a chilling resolve. He told him what he was doing. Jackson thought he was bluffing, a threat born of anger. But he was lifted off his feet and carried to the bedroom. Ethan knelt over him on the bed, his voice a low, self-deprecating murmur. He said if Jackson had shown any real resistance, he would have let him go. But he hadn't. He looked down at Jackson's body pointedly, asking if a man about to get married would have such a visceral reaction to his best friend. He had been a fool, he said, thinking he could win Jackson over slowly, subtly. He had underestimated his own possessiveness. He couldn't stand seeing Jackson look at anyone else. Soft methods hadn't worked, so he was resorting to something harder. The night was a blur. Jackson's protests were swallowed by kisses. His struggles met with an unnerving strength he never knew Ethan possessed. The man he thought he knew, the reserved, almost shy boy from his memories, was gone, replaced by someone possessive and raw. He was woken by the system's screeching return. It accused him of sleeping with the male lead. Jackson, every muscle aching, threw back the covers to reveal a canvas of bruises and marks across his skin, far worse than the few scratches on Ethan's back. He roared back at the system that he was the one who got slept with. He also cursed its faulty, auto-triggering shock punishment, which had been misfiring all night, zapping him at random intervals. He demanded to know what had happened to the plot. The system, flustered, explained. The dip in the affection score had been a glitch. It had all converted into a blackout value, an obsession meter. After consulting with a more experienced system, it had found a loophole to save the scenario. It had quietly changed the designated female lead of the story. To Jackson, it stammered that as long as he remained the receptive partner, the main server, which was apparently rather old-fashioned, wouldn't notice the gender discrepancy. Then, with a cheery farewell, it signed off for good. A soft movement beside him brought him back. Ethan was awake. He gathered Jackson's fist in his hand and pressed it against his own cheek, nuzzling into his shoulder like he used to when they were kids. He apologized, his voice thick with emotion. He said seeing Jackson give away the baby's breath, their flower, had made him snap. He thought Jackson was truly leaving him for good. Jackson retorted, asking about his own cozy chats with Claire. Ethan gave a small, low laugh. He asked if Jackson was jealous. He leaned in, their foreheads touching. He admitted he'd been suspicious, so he'd asked Claire a few questions. She had told him she was allergic to the flowers in the tea Jackson had bought for her. He realized then that Jackson's heart wasn't in it. He wasn't really trying to win her over. His voice grew soft, uncertain, as he asked if Jackson was still angry. Jackson just looked at him. Ethan pulled him into a fierce embrace, his breath warm against his ear. He promised that if Jackson was angry, he would spend the rest of his life making it up to him. He was never letting him go. He had spent 20 years, from age 5 to 25, with him. Now it was his turn to repay that devotion for a lifetime. All Jackson had to do was stand still and let him. Jackson wrapped his arms around him, a long, slow sigh escaping his lips. He loved him too. The 20 years he had spent with Ethan were also 20 years Ethan had spent with him. In his first life, he was an orphan. In this one, he was too. He had chased fleeting connections to prove he was worthy of love. But it was only Ethan who had ever climbed into the darkness to pull him out, promising that if Jackson could only take one hesitant step, he would gladly walk the other 99 to meet him. After they made it official, Jackson discovered the real Ethan Cole was a master of disguise. Outside, he was the picture of corporate grace and unshakable composure. In the bedroom, he was a different man entirely, with a filthy mouth and an imagination that was both shocking and thrilling. It was a lot, but Jackson figured he could handle it. After all this, how could he not?